Pancreas are another very important gland, a pink-shaped leaf-like gland which is present in the body and governs the two important secretions. What are those? Those are insulin and glucagon. We would understand this in a while. Pancreas, as we have understood before, are heterocrine glands. What do you mean by heterocrine glands? Heterocrine glands are those glands which produce both endocrine functions as well as exocrine, who work as both endocrine as well as exocrine gland. Endocrine are those glands that release the secretion directly into the blood. They are ductless. Exocrine are those which have duct. Where is this pancreas situated? Pancreas, as you can see in this picture, so here you have the stomach that starts. So it is located in the posterior margins of the stomach in the loop of the duodenum. Now duodenum is the first part of your small intestine. Duodenum, jejunum and ileum. So duodenum is the first part of the small intestine. In the loop of duodenum, you have the pancreas which are located. Now, there is another important thing that we commonly hear, a term known as diabetes. A very common comorbidity these days. Now, this comorbidity has further aggravated during this post-COVID scenario or the COVID phase. Worldwide, the data says that around 25 crore people across the globe are diabetic, of which 4 crore people are in India. It is believed that by 2025, nearly one child out of every 5 child would be diabetic. So with that high incidence of diabetes, we need to understand how and what are the major functions of pancreas. Now, to begin with, as I said, there are two important elements. Those are the exocrine as well as the endocrine. Exocrine is the part which releases the pancreatic juice, which is carried by the pancreatic duct into the duodenum, and that helps in what? Definitely it is going to duodenum, small intestine, so helping with digestion. So this contains digestive enzymes that help with digestion. So within the close view of what is known as the islets of Langerhans, which are present in pancreas, we have 3 important cells, alpha, beta and delta cells, along with the duct which connects with the exocrine part, and this is where we have the exocrine gland. So exocrine gland, I repeat again, in the pancreas is the region where you have the pancreatic juice which is carried by the pancreatic duct, and this duct empties into duodenum. Duodenum is the first part of a small intestine, and this pancreatic juice contains the digestive enzymes useful for the digestion of the food. Coming back to the 3 important cells, alpha, beta and delta. Alpha, beta and delta are Greek terminologies. Alpha is the first alphabet of Greek letters. Now alpha cells here, as you can see, which are marked here, secretes glucagon. Beta cells secrete insulin, which are marked here, and then you have the yellow colored marking as the delta cells which secrete somatostatin. What is somatostatin? Let's understand that first. Somatostatin is an interesting thing that actually inhibits the secretion of both insulin and glucagon. So it controls the secretion of both insulin and glucagon. Now, alpha, beta and delta are part of the endocrine glands. Exocrine gland, we saw that it empties into the pancreatic duct, into the duodenum, and here alpha, beta and delta are part of the endocrine gland. That means these are specialized endocrine cells that empty directly into the blood, and together they are known as islet of Langerhans, along with other exocrine glands which they are scattered with. Coming on to each of those. So first let's talk about the beta cells. Beta cells release what? We know insulin. What is the function of insulin? Whenever in the blood the amount of sugar rises, there is an immediate signal to release more of insulin. Why? The role of insulin is to convert glucose to glycogen, and this is done by insulin. So, it controls the amount of sugar in the blood. That's the main role of insulin. So, it controls carbohydrate metabolism. It maintains the blood glucose levels, as we already mentioned. It is used or it promotes the use of glucose by the body cells. So, body cells would utilize more of glucose, and therefore, there would be more absorption of glucose, and it also helps into the conversion of extra glucose into glycogen, and therefore maintains the amount of glucose in the body. So, insulin mainly responsible for maintaining the amount of glucose in the body cells. Extra glucose is converted into glycogen by the liver cells and muscles. Two important things which converted, what are those? Liver cells and muscles. So, liver cells and muscles would convert the extra glucose into glycogen. As mentioned, it would speed up the synthesis of fatty acid, slow down the process of gluconeogenesis and glucogenolysis, which we would understand in a while. Don't worry about the terminologies. And it would also accelerate the facilitated diffusion of glucose in the cells. To summarize again, insulin are released by beta cells. I am repeating this because it's very important. A lot of students confuse here. Insulin is secreted by beta cells. The idea is to control the excess amount of sugar in the blood, and therefore with more insulin the extra amount of glucose would be controlled, and this glucose would be converted into what? Glycogen. And if the glycogen is to be converted into glucose, what is responsible? So once during the time when I have high blood sugar levels, my extra glucose is converted into glycogen. This glycogen is stored where? In the muscles and the liver cells. Now, when there is a need for sugar in my body and there is no extra sugar coming in, what would happen? This glycogen, which is stored in the liver cells and the muscles, gets converted into glucose. How would this happen? This would happen through glucagon. Who secretes glucagon? Alpha cells. And who inhibit both the insulin and the glucagon? Somatostatin released by the delta cells. Okay, so glycogen is converted into glucose further by glucagon. Now, insulin is the first thing that we are talking about. As mentioned, insulin controls the carbohydrate metabolism, converts extra glucose into glycogen. Now, what would the hyposecretions and hypersecretions work on? So, when there is hyposecretion, less secretion of insulin, what would happen? If insulin is secreted less, there would be more sugar in the blood, correct? If there is more sugar in the blood, that sugar would be passed through urine, high level of glucose in the blood, and this is responsible for a disease which is known as diabetes mellitus. So, diabetes mellitus would be the disease which would be responsible or which would occur because of hyposecretions of insulin. Insulin controls the blood sugar. If insulin secretion is less, my blood glucose levels would be high. Therefore, more glucose, more sugar in the blood, more glucose in the urine, and feeling of excessive thirst, excessive urination, loss of weight, weakness are some of the common symptoms. In extreme cases, there can be damage to kidneys, loss of vision in extreme cases of diabetes. Now, this is because of less secretion. What would happen because of more secretion? Hypersecretion. If more of insulin is secreted, then my blood glucose levels would go down. That means hypoglycemia. Hypoglycemia, a person becomes unconscious, can even collapse, and this is commonly seen in cases of insulin shock. What happens? A patient who is diabetic takes an insulin. If the levels of insulin taken by the patient are more than the patient should take at that moment, what would happen? The patient would immediately go into hypoglycemia, and this is what is known as insulin shock. Very, very dangerous, and therefore it is usually recommended that diabetes patients should always carry sweets or candies or something sweet with them in case there is an episode of hypoglycemia or insulin shock that can occur. So, role of insulin, very, very important in the body. Coming on to how this whole balance is done is through the feedback mechanism that we have understand in the separate section. The next is the role of glucagon. Glucagon is converting glycogen into glucose, as I mentioned before. So, our body, when there is excessive sugar in the body, our body converts this glucose into glycogen, and this glycogen is stored in liver cells, in muscles, and when there is a need, when I do not have a lot of sugar in the body or I am not intaking a lot of sugar, but my body is metabolizing and it requires some kind of sugar, what would happen? Immediately the signal would go and this glycogen would be broken down into glucose by glucagon. This process is known as glycogenolysis. Lysis means breaking. So there is breaking of the glycogen into glucose, which can be actively utilized by the body. Similarly, sometimes lactic acid or amino acid can be broken down into glucose as well by glucagon. So glucagon not just breaks down the glycogen, but also the lactic acid or the amino acid is broken down into glucose by glucagon. And this lactic acid or amino acid, when they are broken down into glucose, it is known as gluconeogenesis. So gluconeogenesis and glycogenolysis, both of those are very, very important. The idea of glucagon, which is released by the alpha cells, is to raise the amount of glucose in the blood. Now, to raise the amount of glucose in the blood, where it will act? It would act on the liver cells. It would act on the muscles where the lactic acid is stored. And therefore, it stimulates more of the production of sugar. Now, a quick summary about pancreas. Pancreas, as we mentioned, are heterocrine glands, exocrine as well as endocrine. So, exocrine is the part which releases the pancreatic juice through the pancreatic duct into the duodenum. Endocrine is the part which releases the alpha cells, which has the alpha cells, beta cells and delta cells. Alpha cells are responsible for releasing of glucagon. Beta cells are responsible for release of insulin, and delta cells are responsible for release of somatostatin. Somatostatin controls or inhibits both the insulin and the glucagon. So that's a quick summary about pancreas.